The judge said 7 years, and my ex-husband smiled as if he had just won the lottery. Emily Carter stood motionless in the center of the courtroom, while the words echoed through the silent chamber. The polished wooden benches were filled with reporters, investors, former friends, and curious strangers who had come to witness the downfall of a woman once admired across Chicago's business circles. Outside the tall courthouse windows, gray clouds covered the city skyline, turning the afternoon light cold and colorless. Inside, every eye remained fixed on her. Some looked disappointed. Some looked satisfied. Others simply looked relieved that it was not their life falling apart. Emily kept her hands folded in front of her and stared straight ahead. She refused to look weak. She refused to give anyone the tears they expected. Across the room sat Ryan Mitchell, her ex-husband, the man she had loved for nearly 10 years. The man who now sat comfortably beside a team of expensive attorneys. His navy suit looked flawless. His silver watch reflected the courtroom lights. To anyone watching, Ryan appeared calm and confident, like a man who believed justice had been served. The judge continued speaking, explaining financial misconduct, evidence, testimony, and legal conclusions. Emily heard the words but felt strangely detached from them. The decision had already been made long before this day arrived. Long before the headlines. Long before the investigation. Long before the divorce. She knew exactly when her life had started to unravel. It began the moment she trusted the wrong person. A reporter near the front row scribbled notes quickly. Another quietly adjusted a camera lens. The story was already being written. Former executive convicted. Businesswoman sentenced. Public fall from grace. The newspapers would have plenty of dramatic titles by morning. None of them would contain the truth. Ryan finally looked at her. Their eyes met for only a second. Yet that second told her everything. He believed she had lost. Completely. Permanently. He believed today marked the end of her story. Emily almost smiled at the thought. Almost. The judge finished speaking and the courtroom remained silent for a moment. Then chairs shifted. Papers moved. Conversations quietly resumed. The hearing was over. People began standing. Reporters rushed toward exits to publish updates before competitors. Investors exchanged whispers. Former colleagues avoided eye contact. Emily noticed all of it. She noticed who stayed silent. She noticed who walked away. Most importantly, she noticed who looked relieved. The courtroom officer approached and politely instructed her to move toward the side exit. Emily nodded. No arguments. No dramatic protests. No emotional scene. She simply followed instructions. Ryan watched her from across the room. For years he had underestimated one thing about Emily. Her ability to endure. He mistook quietness for weakness. Patience for surrender. Dignity for defeat. As she reached the courtroom door, something unexpected happened. Ryan stood. The movement drew attention from several nearby reporters. He took a few steps forward. Not enough to seem emotional. Just enough to be noticed. Emily, he called. The room became quieter again. Emily stopped and slowly turned around. Ryan looked almost sympathetic. Almost. You should have told the truth when you had the chance. Several people nearby nodded slightly. It sounded like a reasonable statement. Sounded like concern. Emily knew better. Ryan had always understood how to perform for an audience. She looked at him carefully. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Emily finally answered. Her voice remained calm and steady. One day the truth will be expensive. The sentence was simple. Yet something about it caused several people to glance at one another. Ryan laughed softly. Not cruelly. Not loudly. Just enough to signal confidence. He believed the matter was finished. He believed she was speaking from denial. Emily offered no further explanation. She turned and walked through the doorway. Behind her, conversations immediately resumed. Reporters continued working. Lawyers gathered documents. Investors discussed business. Life moved on. But as Emily walked down the long courthouse corridor toward an uncertain future, she felt something unexpected beneath the weight of humiliation and loss. Certainty. Deep certainty. Because there was one truth nobody in that courtroom knew. Not Ryan. Not the judge. Not the reporters. Not even the people who once called themselves her friends. They believed Emily Carter had reached the end of her life. They believed prison would erase her. They believed her name would slowly disappear from memory. Emily stepped into the elevator and watched the courthouse floor number descend. A faint reflection stared back at her from the polished steel doors. Tired. Alone. Disgraced. Yet far from defeated. Somewhere beyond the walls of that courthouse, a secret had been waiting for years. A secret connected to a father she barely knew. A fortune nobody imagined belonged to her. And a future that would one day force Ryan Mitchell to question everything he thought he understood. The elevator doors opened. Emily took a slow breath and stepped forward into the next chapter of her life, while behind her, the man who believed he had won remained completely unaware that his greatest mistake had only just begun. The first morning arrived before Emily Carter had slept even a single hour. Pale sunlight filtered through the narrow window high above her bunk, painting a thin rectangle of light across the concrete floor. The room was quiet except for distant footsteps echoing through the corridor. She sat upright on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. Less than 24 hours earlier she had stood inside a Chicago courtroom surrounded by cameras and reporters. Now the world felt impossibly far away. She wondered how quickly people were forgetting her. The answer arrived sooner than expected. Days turned into weeks. Weeks slowly became months. First a few letters arrived. Some came from former co-workers expressing sympathy. Others came from distant acquaintances promising support. But promises are easy when headlines are fresh. As public attention moved elsewhere, the letters stopped coming. One by one, the people who once filled Emily's calendar disappeared from her life. The silence became its own kind of education. She learned who cared about her reputation. She learned who cared about her success. Most importantly, she learned how few people cared about her. Meanwhile, outside those walls, Ryan Mitchell seemed to be thriving. His face appeared regularly in business magazines. His company expanded into new markets. Investors praised his leadership. Journalists described him as resilient and visionary. Emily occasionally saw articles left behind in common areas. Every photograph showed the same confident smile. Every interview repeated the same story. Ryan was rebuilding. Ryan was succeeding. Ryan had overcome adversity. Not a single article mentioned the woman who once stood beside him through every difficult year. Not a single article mentioned her contributions. It was as if she had never existed. The realization hurt more than she expected. Not because she wanted attention. Because she finally understood how completely she had been erased. One cold November afternoon, nearly 11 months after entering prison, Emily sat alone near a window in the library. Snow drifted outside beneath a gray sky. Most people inside spent their time reading novels or passing the hours with conversation. Emily preferred silence. She spent her days studying business books, financial reports, biographies, and anything that challenged her mind. She refused to let bitterness become her future. If life had taken everything from her, then knowledge would become the one thing nobody could take away. That afternoon a staff member approached carrying a sealed envelope. Emily Carter? Emily looked up. Yes. The woman handed over the envelope. This arrived for you. Emily frowned slightly. Very few people knew where she was. Even fewer had any reason to contact her. She examined the envelope carefully. No personal message appeared on the front. Only her name. Nothing else. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside was a letter written on expensive cream-colored paper. The signature at the bottom immediately caught her attention. Harrison Blake. Attorney at law. Emily stared at the name. She recognized it. Years earlier her mother had mentioned a lawyer by that name during a difficult conversation she never fully explained. Emily unfolded the letter completely and began reading. With every sentence her expression changed. Confusion became curiosity. Curiosity became disbelief. By the time she reached the final paragraph, she could no longer feel the room around her. The letter explained that a man named William Hawthorne had recently passed away in Switzerland. Emily knew the name. Barely. Her mother had spoken it only twice during her childhood. Both times with sadness in her voice. William Hawthorne was her biological father. A man she had never met. A man she believed wanted nothing to do with her. According to the letter, that belief was completely wrong. Harrison Blake requested an immediate meeting upon her release. Matters regarding a family estate required urgent attention. Emily read the letter again. Then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly. Family estate. The word seemed harmless enough. Yet something about the language suggested far more than a simple inheritance. For the first time in nearly a year, a feeling stronger than pain entered her heart. Hope. Dangerous. Fragile. Unexpected hope. That evening she sat alone on her bunk long after lights out. Around her, the building settled into nighttime silence. Emily stared toward the darkness and thought about the father she never knew. The questions seemed endless. Why had he searched for her? Why now? Why had nobody told her sooner? Most importantly, what exactly was waiting beyond these walls? Across the country, Ryan stood beneath crystal chandeliers at a luxury hotel celebrating another successful acquisition. Investors applauded. Champagne glasses touched. Cameras flashed. He raised a glass and smiled for photographs, completely unaware that thousands of miles away, a single letter had just begun changing everything. While he celebrated the life he believed he had secured forever, fate was quietly opening a door neither of them saw coming. And hidden behind that door was a truth powerful enough to transform a forgotten prisoner into one of the wealthiest women in the world. The letter remained hidden beneath Emily Carter's mattress for nearly 3 weeks before she finally allowed herself to believe it was real. Every night after lights out, she unfolded the expensive cream-colored paper and read the same paragraphs again. William Hawthorne, her biological father, a man she had spent most of her life believing abandoned her before she was born, a man she had never met, a man who was now gone. Yet somehow his shadow had returned to her life at the exact moment everything else had disappeared. Winter settled over the prison grounds. Snow covered the fences and rooftops in white silence. Inside, routines never changed. Wake up. Work assignments. Meals. Study. Sleep. The repetition gave people too much time to think. Emily used those hours differently. She studied financial markets, corporate leadership, international business law. She filled notebooks with observations and ideas. Other people counted days. Emily counted possibilities. The letter had awakened something inside her. Not hope alone. Curiosity. Questions she had buried for years suddenly demanded answers. Why would a powerful attorney contact her now? Why had her father waited so long? And what exactly was this family estate that required immediate attention? One snowy afternoon, nearly 14 months after receiving the letter, another envelope arrived. This one was thicker, more formal. Emily immediately recognized the same law firm's seal. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside were several documents along with a handwritten note from Harrison Blake. The attorney explained that legal restrictions prevented him from sharing certain details before an in-person meeting. However, he felt Emily deserved clarification regarding the scale of the matter. She began reading. Within seconds, the room around her seemed to disappear. William Hawthorne had not been an ordinary businessman. He had been the founder of Hawthorne Global Holdings, a multinational investment empire with interests spanning technology, transportation, renewable energy, real estate, and international finance. The company operated in more than 30 countries. Its valuation exceeded numbers Emily had only seen in financial publications. She stopped reading and stared at the page. Then she read it again. And again. The figures remained unchanged. The letter continued. Following extensive legal review, DNA verification, and succession proceedings, Emily Carter had been identified as the sole surviving heir. Her hands trembled slightly.
Sole surviving heir.
The phrase felt impossible. Unreal. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Around her, other women continued their conversations, completely unaware that her entire world had shifted. Emily remembered every difficult year after her mother died. Every unpaid bill. Every second job. Every sacrifice. She remembered struggling to afford textbooks. Remembered working late nights while Ryan built his early business contacts. Remembered choosing loyalty when easier options existed. Through all of it, she never imagined she belonged to one of the wealthiest families on earth. The realization was almost absurd. That evening she sat by the small window in her housing unit and watched snowflakes drift beneath security lights. For the first time since entering prison, She allowed herself to imagine life beyond the walls. Not because of money, because of opportunity. Opportunity to rebuild. Opportunity to understand her father. Opportunity to finally discover who she was outside the identity others had assigned to her. Months later, spring arrived. Then summer. Time continued moving forward. Emily remained disciplined. She spoke little about the inheritance. In fact, she spoke to nobody about it. Secrets become valuable when protected. Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell's success continued growing. Business magazines praised his expansion strategy. Industry conferences invited him as a keynote speaker. His company headquarters expanded into a new glass tower overlooking downtown Chicago. From every visible angle, his future appeared limitless. Yet success had changed him. Interviews became more arrogant. Public appearances became more theatrical. People noticed. Most ignored it. A few quietly worried. Ryan did not care. Why would he? The woman who once challenged him was gone. The woman who understood his weaknesses better than anyone was locked away. He believed the past had been permanently buried. 2 years after receiving the first letter, Emily finally reached the day she had imagined. Countless times. Release day. The morning arrived quietly.
No celebration. No dramatic moment.
Just paperwork, signatures, and instructions. She packed her few belongings into a small bag and walked toward the exit. Her heart pounded harder with each step. Outside the gate, sunlight filled the parking lot. A warm breeze moved through nearby trees. Freedom felt almost unfamiliar. Emily expected nobody to be waiting. After all, nobody had visited in years. Then she saw them. 3 black vehicles parked near the entrance. Beside the lead car stood a distinguished man in an expensive suit. Gray hair. Straight posture. Calm expression. The moment he saw her, he removed his sunglasses and smiled politely. Emily stopped walking. Harrison Blake. The attorney stepped forward and extended his hand. Miss Carter, he said warmly. I have been looking forward to meeting you. Emily glanced toward the waiting vehicles. Professional drivers stood nearby. Everything about the scene felt surreal. Harrison noticed her reaction. I understand this may feel overwhelming. Emily managed a small smile. That is one way to describe it. Harrison opened the rear door of the lead vehicle. There is much we need to discuss. Emily looked back once toward the prison gates. 4 years they had defined her future. Now they were already behind her. She turned forward again and stepped into the waiting car. As the door closed softly beside her, Harrison handed over a thick leather folder. Emily opened it. The first page displayed a number so large she briefly thought it was a mistake. Then Harrison spoke words that would change her life forever. Welcome to the Hawthorne Empire, Miss Carter. Everything now belongs to you. Emily Carter spent most of the first hour staring at the number on the page without speaking. The black luxury vehicle moved smoothly through the streets of Chicago, while the city passed outside the tinted windows. Traffic lights changed. Buildings rose and disappeared behind them. People hurried along sidewalks carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Ordinary life continued exactly as it always had. Yet nothing about Emily's life felt ordinary anymore. She looked up from the leather folder and glanced toward Harrison Blake. This cannot be real. The attorney smiled politely. I assure you it is. Emily lowered her eyes to the documents again. Company valuations. Asset reports. International holdings. Private investment portfolios. The figures stretched beyond anything she could comprehend. During her years with Ryan Mitchell, she had reviewed major business contracts worth millions of dollars. This was different. Entire industries seemed connected to the Hawthorne name. Airlines, energy projects, technology firms, real estate developments across multiple continents. It felt less like inheriting wealth and more like inheriting a nation. Harrison allowed her a few moments before speaking again. Your father spent many years searching for you. Emily looked up immediately. Searching. Harrison nodded. There were circumstances you do not yet know. He paused carefully. Circumstances your mother chose not to discuss. Emily stared through the window. Questions filled her mind. Questions that had existed since childhood. Questions she never expected to receive answers to. Yet another part of her understood that some answers would need time. For now there was something more immediate waiting. The future. Nearly an hour later, the vehicle entered a private driveway lined with tall trees and perfectly maintained landscaping. At the end stood a sprawling estate overlooking Lake Michigan. Emily had seen mansions before. This felt different. Elegant rather than excessive. Powerful rather than flashy. The kind of place built by people who never needed to prove they were wealthy. Harrison noticed her reaction. "Your father lived here when he was in the United States." Emily remained silent. Everything felt surreal. The estate staff greeted her warmly but professionally. Nobody looked surprised to see her. Nobody treated her like an outsider. Somehow they already seemed to understand what she was still trying to accept herself. During the following weeks, Emily's life transformed completely. Every day introduced new information, new responsibilities, new challenges. Harrison assembled advisors, executives, and legal specialists to guide her through the transition. At first she expected them to treat her like an inexperienced heir. Instead, something unexpected happened. They listened. They asked questions. They respected her opinions. Slowly Emily understood why. The Hawthorne leadership team had already reviewed her background extensively. Her business education, her strategic planning experience, her years helping Ryan build his company, her ability to analyze markets and solve complex problems. The skills she developed before prison had not disappeared. They had simply remained hidden. One morning she attended her first board meeting. The conference room occupied the top floor of Hawthorne Global's North American headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago. Around the table sat some of the most accomplished executives in the world. Emily expected intimidation. Instead she felt strangely calm. She had spent years believing her life was over. Compared to that, a boardroom was easy. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Investment reviews, expansion plans, global operations, corporate strategy. Emily listened carefully and spoke only when necessary. Yet by the end of the day several executives exchanged impressed glances. She noticed. So did Harrison. As they left the building he smiled. "Your father would have enjoyed watching that." Emily looked toward the skyline. "I barely knew him." Harrison nodded. "Perhaps." Then he added quietly, "But you inherited more from him than you realize." Months passed. Then a year. Emily worked harder than she ever had before. While many heirs simply protected existing wealth, she wanted to understand every part of the business. She traveled constantly. New York, London, Zurich, Singapore. Meetings filled her calendar. Reports filled her evenings. Knowledge became her obsession. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. By the end of the second year, Emily was no longer viewed as William Hawthorne's daughter. She had become a respected executive in her own right. Board members sought her opinion. Investors requested private meetings. Senior leadership trusted her judgment. For the first time in her life, she occupied a position nobody could take away through gossip, betrayal, or manipulation. Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell continued expanding his own company. Business publications celebrated his success. Interviews praised his leadership. Yet subtle cracks had begun forming beneath the surface. Growth slowed. Competition increased. Several ambitious projects failed to meet expectations. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing public. Just enough pressure to create concern among investors. Ryan responded the only way he knew how. By chasing larger opportunities, bigger acquisitions, bigger partnerships, bigger risks. He remained completely unaware that somewhere above him in the corporate world, Emily Carter was quietly building an empire. One evening, nearly 3 years after leaving prison, Emily stood alone inside her office overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights glittered below like stars scattered across the earth. Harrison entered carrying a folder. His expression suggested interesting news. "What is it?" Emily asked. Harrison placed the folder on her desk. "A company called Mitchell Technologies is seeking strategic investment partners." Emily stared at the name. The room became very quiet. 3 years had passed since she last heard it spoken aloud. Harrison continued carefully. "Their expansion plans require significant outside capital." Emily opened the folder and began reading. Revenue reports, market forecasts, funding requirements. Every page carried Ryan's name. Harrison watched her expression. Would you like me to decline the opportunity? Emily looked out across the city for a long moment. Then she closed the folder gently. A faint smile appeared. Calm, controlled, unreadable. No, she replied. Let us see where this goes. 3 years passed faster than Emily Carter ever imagined. The woman who once sat alone inside a prison library studying borrowed business books no longer existed. In her place stood the chief executive officer of Hawthorne Global Holdings, one of the most influential investment empires in the world. Yet very few people knew her face. That anonymity was intentional. While other executives appeared on magazine covers and business television programs, Emily preferred conference rooms to cameras and strategy meetings to interviews. Her influence expanded quietly. Her reputation grew through results rather than publicity. Investors respected her. Board members trusted her. Competitors watched her carefully. But almost nobody outside elite business circles could recognize her walking down a city street. That suited her perfectly. One autumn morning, Emily stood inside her office overlooking Lake Michigan. The sunrise painted gold reflections across the water, while the city slowly awakened below. Harrison Blake entered carrying several folders. His expression immediately caught her attention. Good news? Emily asked. Harrison smiled slightly. Potentially. He placed the documents on her desk. Mitchell Technologies has formally launched its expansion proposal. Emily looked down at the familiar company name. For several seconds she said nothing. 3 years earlier hearing Ryan Mitchell's name would have filled her with pain. Now it produced something entirely different. Distance. The emotional storm had passed long ago. What remained was clarity. She opened the first report and began reading. Revenue growth had slowed significantly. Several international projects were underperforming. Investors remained supportive, but confidence was becoming fragile. Most importantly, Ryan needed capital. A great deal of capital. Harrison took a seat across from her. Their leadership team is seeking strategic investment partners capable of supporting a major acquisition. Emily continued turning pages. Forecasts, presentations, risk assessments. She recognized Ryan's style immediately. Ambitious, aggressive, confident, sometimes too confident. The same confidence that once convinced him he understood everything. Harrison folded his hands together. What would you like to do? Emily looked toward the skyline beyond the glass. The answer came surprisingly easily. Nothing. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Emily smiled faintly. At least not yet. Meanwhile, across downtown Chicago, Ryan Mitchell prepared for another investor presentation. His company occupied the upper floors of a sleek glass tower that reflected the city skyline. Like a mirror, employees moved quickly through hallways carrying tablets, reports, and coffee cups. From the outside, everything appeared successful. Yet Ryan felt pressure building beneath the surface. The previous year had not unfolded according to plan. Competition intensified. Costs increased. Several expansion efforts failed to deliver expected results. None of it was disastrous, but maintaining momentum required resources. More resources than his current investors were willing to provide. As he entered the boardroom, a large screen displayed a list of potential investment firms. One name sat at the top: Hawthorne Global Holdings. Ryan glanced at it briefly before taking his seat. Like most people, he knew the company well. Everyone did. Hawthorne Global had become one of the most respected investment organizations in the world. Their involvement often transformed entire industries, yet very little information existed regarding the person now leading the empire. The new chief executive officer rarely appeared publicly. Business journalists described the leader as brilliant, disciplined, and unusually private. Ryan had never paid much attention. Why would he? His focus remained on securing the funding his company needed. Across the city, Emily attended a strategy meeting involving renewable energy investments in Europe. The discussion lasted 4 hours. Yet near the end, one of her senior executives brought up Mitchell Technologies. Their proposal continues attracting attention. Emily remained neutral. And your assessment? The executive opened a report. Strong potential. Elevated risk. Another board member nodded. The acquisition could succeed if managed carefully. Emily listened without revealing her thoughts. She appreciated objective analysis. Personal history had no place in professional decisions. That principle mattered deeply to her. Ironically, it was a principle Ryan once failed to understand. The following weeks brought additional developments. Several investment firms declined Mitchell Technologies. Others expressed interest but offered unfavorable terms. Pressure continued increasing. Ryan responded by working harder. More meetings. More travel. More presentations. The pursuit became relentless. One evening he stood alone in his office reviewing financial forecasts. Outside the windows, Chicago glowed beneath the night sky. He loosened his tie and rubbed his eyes. Success had always come through persistence. That belief carried him for years. Yet lately something felt different. Opportunities seemed narrower. Risks seemed larger. For the first time in a long while, uncertainty entered his calculations. At nearly the same moment, Emily sat inside a private conference room at Hawthorne Global headquarters. Senior advisors reviewed final recommendations regarding several investment opportunities. Mitchell Technologies appeared once again. Harrison noticed her thoughtful expression. "You have a decision to make." Emily nodded. She already knew that. The room became quiet while executives waited. Finally she closed the report. "Schedule a meeting." Several people exchanged glances. Harrison smiled slightly. "With Mitchell Technologies?" Emily nodded once. "Yes." An executive looked surprised. "Should we disclose your involvement?" Emily considered the question carefully. Then she shook her head. "Not yet." The meeting ended shortly afterward. As the others departed, Harrison remained behind. "Are you certain?" Emily stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere among them, Ryan Mitchell was likely preparing for another day of negotiations. Another day chasing opportunities he desperately needed. Another day believing he controlled his future. Emily smiled faintly. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she wanted him to suffer. Because fate had a remarkable sense of timing. Harrison joined her near the glass. "What are you thinking?" Emily watched the city below. "I am thinking that some people spend years running from the truth." She paused. Eventually, the truth catches up. Far below, traffic moved through downtown streets while two lives that once traveled the same road moved steadily toward a meeting neither would ever forget. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. It appeared ordinary at first glance, buried among dozens of proposals, acquisition reports, and investment briefings delivered to Ryan Mitchell's office every week. Yet within minutes of opening it, he pushed every other document aside. Mitchell Technologies had officially been selected for a private meeting with representatives from Hawthorne Global Holdings. Ryan read the message twice to make certain he understood it correctly. Then a third time. A slow smile appeared on his face. For months he had pursued opportunities capable of accelerating his company's growth. Most had led nowhere. Some offered unacceptable conditions. Others simply lacked the scale he needed. Hawthorne Global was different. A partnership with them would change everything. Across the financial world, their reputation bordered on legendary. Companies that secured their support often experienced explosive growth. Entire industries adjusted their strategies whenever Hawthorne entered a market. The invitation felt less like a meeting and more like a doorway into a completely different future. Ryan immediately summoned his executive team. Within an hour, senior leadership filled the conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. Presentation materials covered the large screen. Financial forecasts flashed across digital displays. Excitement spread throughout the room. "This is the opportunity we have been waiting for," Ryan announced confidently. Heads nodded around the table. Several executives looked genuinely relieved. Everyone understood the pressure facing the company. Revenue remained strong, but expansion required resources. Significant resources. Hawthorne Global could provide all of them. The meeting continued for nearly 3 hours. Strategies were reviewed. Projections were refined. Potential questions were anticipated. By the end, Ryan felt more confident than he had in months. As the executives departed, one advisor remained behind. There is something unusual about this situation. Ryan glanced up. What do you mean? The advisor folded his arms thoughtfully. Nobody seems to know who will actually lead the meeting. Ryan shrugged. Probably one of their senior investment directors. Perhaps. The advisor hesitated. But normally Hawthorne Global provides at least some information regarding key decision makers. This time there is almost nothing. Ryan leaned back in his chair. If they are interested enough to schedule a meeting, that is all that matters. The advisor nodded but still appeared uncertain. After he left, Ryan returned to studying company reports. The warning barely registered. Meanwhile, 20 floors above a private executive wing at Hawthorne Global headquarters, Emily Carter reviewed the same meeting schedule. Morning sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows while Chicago stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Harrison Blake entered carrying updated briefing materials. Everything is confirmed, he said. Emily accepted the folder. Good. Harrison watched her carefully. You still have time to assign someone else. Emily smiled faintly. Why would I? Harrison considered the question. The answer was obvious. Because the meeting would be emotionally complicated. Because the past had a habit of reopening old wounds. Because Ryan Mitchell had once destroyed nearly everything she valued. Yet Emily no longer viewed the situation through that lens. The years had changed her. Success had changed her. Experience had changed her. She no longer measured life through pain. She measured it through perspective. I simply wanted to ask, Harrison said. Emily closed the folder. Then I will answer clearly. She looked out toward the city. I am not meeting my past. Her expression remained calm. I am meeting a company seeking investment. Harrison smiled. That response told him everything. 3 years earlier she might have approached the meeting differently. Now she approached it as a leader. Nothing more. Nothing less. During the following days, preparations intensified on both sides. Ryan rehearsed presentations repeatedly. Financial analysts refined forecasts. Attorneys reviewed documents. Every detail mattered. Success could reshape the company's future. Failure could create serious problems. Yet despite all the preparation, Ryan found himself increasingly curious about one thing. Hawthorne Global's mysterious chief executive officer. Journalists continued speculating. Industry experts offered theories. Some believed the leader was an older European financier. Others suggested a former technology entrepreneur. A few claimed the executive rarely appeared in public because of security concerns. No one seemed certain. Ryan dismissed most of the rumors. Leadership mattered, but results mattered more. Whoever sat across the table would eventually recognize the value of his proposal. Several days later, Emily traveled to New York for unrelated business meetings. While there, she attended a private investment summit, attended by some of the most influential executives in the world. As always, cameras remained outside. Privacy allowed honest conversations. During a break between sessions, one billionaire investor approached her. I hear you are evaluating Mitchell Technologies. Emily smiled politely. News traveled quickly in elite business circles. Among other opportunities, the investor laughed. Ryan Mitchell has been talking about that meeting for weeks. Emily maintained a neutral expression. Has he? Apparently he believes securing Hawthorne support will transform his company. Emily thanked him for the information and continued walking. Yet the conversation lingered in her thoughts. Ryan remained exactly who he had always been. Ambitious. Determined. Certain that success was only one opportunity away. The difference now was that he had no idea who controlled that opportunity. The evening before the meeting finally arrived. Ryan stood inside his penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights. His presentation materials rested neatly across the dining table. Everything was ready. He felt confident. Optimistic even. Across the city, Emily sat alone inside her office after most employees had gone home. The skyline shimmered beyond the windows. Harrison entered briefly before leaving for the evening. Tomorrow morning, he said. Emily nodded. After he left, silence filled the room. She walked toward the glass and looked out across Chicago. Somewhere among those lights, Ryan Mitchell was preparing for the most important meeting of his year. He believed he was about to meet a powerful investor. He believed he understood the stakes. What he did not understand was that when the conference room doors opened the following morning, the woman he once erased from his life would be sitting at the head of the table holding the future of his company in her hands. Ryan Mitchell arrived 30 minutes early. That alone revealed how important the meeting had become. Normally he preferred others to wait for him. Today was different. Hawthorne Global occupied the top floors of one of the most prestigious buildings in Chicago, and every detail reflected power. The lobby walls were covered in polished stone. Soft lighting illuminated modern artwork worth more than most homes. Quiet professionalism filled the air.
No unnecessary noise.
No displays of ego, just confidence. Ryan adjusted his tie as he stepped from the elevator onto the executive floor. Several members of his leadership team followed behind him carrying presentation materials and financial reports. A receptionist greeted them warmly before escorting them toward a large conference suite overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Lake Michigan stretching toward the horizon. Morning sunlight reflected off the water and filled the room with a golden glow. Ryan glanced around, impressed despite himself. One of his executives whispered, "This place is incredible." Ryan nodded. That is what success looks like. They settled into their seats while assistants prepared coffee and water. 10 minutes remained before the scheduled meeting. Ryan reviewed his presentation one final time. Every projection was ready. Every answer prepared. Every detail carefully planned. Across the hall, Emily Carter stood quietly near her office window. She wore a tailored ivory suit and minimal jewelry. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. She no longer needed appearances to create authority. Years of leadership had already accomplished that. Harrison Blake entered carrying a tablet. "They have arrived." Emily nodded calmly. Her pulse remained steady. To her own surprise, she felt no anger, no resentment, no desire for revenge. Time had removed those emotions long ago. What remained was perspective. Ryan represented a chapter of her life. An important chapter. A painful chapter. But still only a chapter. Harrison studied her expression. "Are you ready?" Emily smiled faintly. "I have been ready for years." Several minutes later, Ryan continued discussing final talking points with his team when the conference room door opened. Immediately, every Hawthorne executive already seated at the table stood. The movement caught Ryan's attention. Conversations stopped. The atmosphere shifted. Someone important had arrived. Ryan turned toward the doorway. At first, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. A woman stepped into the room with calm confidence. She moved without hesitation, acknowledging greetings from executives and advisors. Every person present treated her with obvious respect. Ryan stared. His heartbeat slowed, then accelerated. For a moment, the room seemed impossibly quiet. Emily Carter. The name echoed inside his head before he could stop it. Emily. His ex-wife. The woman he believed was gone forever. The woman he watched leave a courtroom years earlier. The woman he assumed had disappeared from the business world entirely. She looked different. Not because of wealth. Not because of fashion. Because of certainty. The uncertainty he once recognized in her eyes had vanished. In its place stood someone completely at ease with power. Ryan remained frozen while Emily approached the head of the table. Every Hawthorne executive remained standing until she took her seat. Only then did the others sit. The message was unmistakable. She was in charge. Completely. Ryan felt as though the floor beneath him had shifted. One of his executives leaned closer and whispered, "You know her." Ryan barely heard the question. Emily opened a folder and glanced briefly around the room before her eyes finally met his. For several seconds neither spoke. Memories rushed through Ryan's mind. The courtroom. The conviction. The divorce. The years that followed. None of it made sense. How could she be here? How could she possibly be leading Hawthorne Global? Emily broke the silence first. Her voice remained calm and professional. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us." No hesitation.
No bitterness.
No emotional reaction. Simply business. Ryan struggled to compose himself. Around him, nobody seemed aware of the history between them. To Hawthorne's executives, this was another meeting. To Ryan, it felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Emily continued reviewing agenda items, investment opportunities, market conditions, strategic partnerships. Every word demonstrated authority. Every question revealed deep understanding. Ryan listened while trying to reconcile the woman before him with the version stored in his memory. The difference was staggering. Eventually, the presentation portion began. Ryan stood and moved toward the screen. Years of experience allowed him to function despite the shock. He discussed projections, expansion plans, and acquisition strategies. Yet throughout the presentation, he remained conscious of Emily sitting across from him, evaluating every detail. Not judging, evaluating, like any other executive reviewing a proposal. Somehow that made the situation even more unsettling. Nearly an hour later, the formal presentation concluded. Questions followed. Emily asked several. Each was precise, insightful, difficult to answer without complete preparation. Ryan managed reasonably well, but he quickly realized something important. Emily understood business at a level far beyond what he remembered. This was not luck. This was expertise earned over years. Finally, the discussion paused. Silence settled briefly over the room. Ryan looked directly at her. He could not stop himself. Emily. The name sounded strange after so many years. Several executives glanced between them. Emily met his gaze calmly. Mr. Mitchell. The formal response landed harder than any accusation could have. Ryan opened his mouth, searching for words. None came. Emily offered a polite smile before returning her attention to the documents in front of her. The meeting continued. Yet in that moment Ryan finally understood something he had never considered possible. The woman he believed he had left behind was gone. In her place sat one of the most powerful business leaders in the world. And for the first time since the day she walked out of that courtroom, Ryan Mitchell felt completely unprepared for what would happen next. The conference room gradually emptied after the meeting concluded. Hawthorne executives gathered their materials and exchanged final comments before leaving for other appointments. Through the massive windows, afternoon sunlight reflected across the city skyline. Ryan Mitchell remained seated longer than necessary, staring at the empty chair where Emily Carter had been sitting only moments earlier. Nothing about the day had unfolded the way he expected. He came seeking investment capital. Instead, he found himself face to face with a past he believed had disappeared forever. One of his executives approached carefully. Ryan, our car is waiting. Ryan nodded absent-mindedly. I will be down shortly. The executive hesitated before leaving. Once alone, Ryan exhaled slowly and rubbed his forehead. Questions filled his mind. How had Emily become the leader of Hawthorne Global? Where had she been all these years? Why had nobody mentioned her name anywhere? Most importantly, how had he completely missed one of the greatest success stories in modern business? Across the building, Emily sat inside her office reviewing post-meeting reports. Her expression remained calm. Harrison Blake entered carrying additional documents. Initial evaluations are positive. Emily accepted the folder. Good. Harrison took a seat. Ryan seemed surprised. A faint smile appeared. I imagine he was. Harrison studied her carefully. You handled it well. Emily looked down at the reports. There was nothing to handle. And she meant it. Years earlier she might have imagined this moment differently. She might have pictured dramatic confrontations or emotional speeches. Reality felt nothing like those fantasies. Success had changed her priorities. The goal was never revenge. The goal was freedom. Freedom from anger. Freedom from regret. Freedom from being defined by someone else's decisions. Harrison remained silent for a moment before speaking again. There is something else you should see. He placed a second folder on the desk. Emily opened it. Her expression slowly changed. Inside were investigative summaries regarding the financial case that had sent her to prison years earlier. Documents she had quietly commissioned over the previous 12 months. Reports from forensic accountants. Independent legal reviews. Witness interviews. Every page brought her closer to a truth she had suspected for years. Emily turned another page. Then another. The deeper she read, the clearer the picture became. Several individuals involved in the original investigation had withheld critical information. Certain financial transactions had been presented without complete context. More importantly, newly discovered records suggested that Emily had not been the primary decision-maker behind several disputed activities. She looked up at Harrison. "How confident are we?" Harrison answered immediately. "Very." Emily closed the folder slowly. The room became quiet. For years she carried the burden of believing she had been denied the opportunity to fully defend herself. Now evidence was emerging that could finally change everything. Meanwhile, across town, Ryan sat inside his office overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights had begun appearing beyond the windows as evening approached. Yet work was the last thing on his mind. He kept seeing Emily's face. Not the Emily he remembered. The woman from the conference room. Confident. Composed. Unshaken. The realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His chief financial officer entered carrying several reports. The Hawthorne meeting generated a follow-up request. Ryan immediately focused. What kind of request? Additional documentation regarding historical financial activity. Ryan frowned slightly. Historical. The executive nodded. Several years' worth. Ryan accepted the documents and began reviewing them. At first nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed specific dates. Dates connected to the period surrounding Emily's legal troubles. His expression changed. Why would they want this? The executive shrugged. Standard due diligence, perhaps. Perhaps. Yet something felt different. Across the city, Emily stood beside her office window long after most employees had gone home. Chicago glowed beneath the evening sky. In her hands rested the investigative file. She thought about the courtroom, the conviction, the years that followed. For so long the truth seemed unreachable. Now it felt closer than ever. Not because she sought revenge, because truth matters, especially when entire lives are shaped by its absence. Over the following weeks, additional evidence continued emerging. Former employees agreed to speak. Financial experts completed independent reviews. Records once overlooked suddenly carried new significance. Piece by piece, the narrative that had defined Emily's downfall began cracking apart. One evening Harrison arrived with another update. This time his expression carried unmistakable excitement. "We found the missing transaction chain." Emily looked up immediately. Harrison handed over several documents. "It changes everything." Emily reviewed the records carefully. The implications were enormous. Critical decisions had originated elsewhere. Key approvals had passed through hands never fully examined during the original investigation. The evidence did not merely create doubt. It pointed toward an entirely different story. Emily closed the folder and looked toward the city lights. For years she wondered whether the truth would ever surface. Now it was rising on its own. Harrison stood beside her. "What would you like to do?" Emily remained silent for a long moment. Then she answered softly. "Nothing extraordinary." Harrison waited. Emily's reflection stared back from the glass. Stronger than before. Wiser than before. Finally free from the weight of the past. "We follow the facts wherever they lead." Across town, Ryan Mitchell sat alone in his office reviewing another request from Hawthorne Global. With every passing day, he felt a growing sense that forces larger than business negotiations were beginning to move around him. He did not yet understand the full picture. He did not yet see how close the truth had become. But for the first time in many years, the story he believed was finished was quietly beginning again. 6 months later, the truth finally stepped into the light. It did not arrive with dramatic headlines or emotional speeches. It arrived through documents, sworn statements, independent audits, and facts that refused to remain buried any longer. Emily Carter sat quietly in a private conference room overlooking Chicago while attorneys, investigators, and financial experts presented their final findings. The evidence was overwhelming. Critical information had been omitted during the original case. Key decisions had originated from individuals who were never properly scrutinized. Financial records once considered complete were revealed to be incomplete. Most importantly, the investigation established that Emily had not been responsible for the actions that ultimately destroyed her life. Years earlier she had entered a courtroom carrying the weight of accusations. Now she sat surrounded by proof that those accusations never told the full story. Harrison Blake closed the final report and looked toward her. The review board has reached its conclusion. Emily nodded quietly. Harrison smiled. Your record will be formally cleared. For several seconds Emily said nothing. She had imagined hearing those words countless times. Yet now that they finally arrived, the emotion was different from what she expected. There was no desire to celebrate. No urge to relive the past. Only peace. A calm understanding that truth eventually finds its way home. News spread rapidly through legal circles, financial media, and corporate networks. Business publications that once ignored her story now covered every development. Journalists revisited old reports. Analysts reviewed timelines. Public opinion shifted with astonishing speed. People who once believed they understood the story suddenly realized how little they actually knew. Across the city, Ryan Mitchell watched the coverage unfold from his office. The articles appeared one after another. Independent review clears former executive. New evidence changes understanding of historic case. Questions emerge regarding original investigation. Ryan stared at the headlines in silence. The realization settled heavily over him. For years he accepted a version of events without challenging it. For years he convinced himself that Emily's conviction proved everything. Now the foundation beneath those beliefs was crumbling. He thought back to the courtroom. To her final words. One day the truth will be expensive. At the time he dismissed them. Now they echoed through his memory with uncomfortable clarity. Meanwhile, Hawthorne Global continued expanding under Emily's leadership. New investments flourished. Strategic partnerships strengthened. International operations reached record performance. Her success no longer surprised anyone. What surprised people was how she responded to her public vindication. She did not launch interviews attacking former enemies. She did not seek public revenge. She did not use her influence to embarrass anyone. Instead, she focused on the future. One spring afternoon, Emily stood on a stage in New York accepting an award recognizing innovation, leadership, and global impact. The ballroom was filled with executives, entrepreneurs, investors, and journalists from around the world. Cameras flashed as she approached the podium. Years earlier she entered public spaces carrying shame she did not deserve. Today she entered them carrying confidence she had earned. The audience applauded warmly. Emily looked across the room and began speaking. Not about prison. Not about betrayal. Not about revenge. She spoke about resilience. About opportunity. About the importance of continuing forward, even when circumstances seem impossible. The speech lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet when she finished, the audience rose to its feet. Standing applause filled the room. Far away in Chicago, Ryan watched a recording of the event later that evening. He sat alone in his office after most employees had gone home. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. On the screen, Emily smiled modestly as reporters surrounded her after the ceremony. She looked genuinely happy. Not triumphant. Not vindictive. Simply happy. Ryan lowered his eyes. For the first time he fully understood what had happened. Emily had not spent years planning his downfall. She had spent years rebuilding herself. While he remained trapped inside old assumptions, she had created an entirely new life. A better life. A larger life. A life no longer connected to him. Several weeks later, Emily visited a newly completed community center funded through the Hawthorne Foundation. The facility provided education, career resources, and support programs for women rebuilding their lives after major setbacks. As she walked through bright hallways filled with activity and optimism, she felt something she had not experienced in years. Gratitude. Not for what happened, but for who she became because she survived it. Harrison joined her near a large window overlooking the city. You know, he said with a smile, most people expected a different ending. Emily looked outside. Children played in a nearby park. Traffic moved through sunlit streets. Life continued. What kind of ending? Harrison laughed softly. The dramatic kind. Emily smiled. Life rarely needs drama when it has purpose. Harrison nodded. They stood quietly for a moment. The skyline stretched across the horizon beneath a clear blue sky. Somewhere within that city lived people who once doubted her. People who underestimated her. People who forgot her. None of it mattered anymore. Emily had already moved beyond all of them. She turned away from the window and continued walking through the center, greeting staff members and visitors along the way. The future waited ahead, bright and open. And as sunlight filled the building around her, one simple truth remained. Ryan Mitchell believed prison would end Emily Carter's story. In reality, it was only the place where she finally discovered who she was meant to become. She did not win him back. She won herself.